JFK Airport was alive with its usual symphony of sounds, the hum of rolling suitcases, the crackle of intercom announcements, and the muffled chatter of thousands of voices blending into a singular, indistinct hum. Travelers moved through the expansive terminal in a hurried dance, some clutching passports tightly, others juggling coffee cups and boarding passes. The glass walls of the airport allowed streaks of pale winter sunlight to flood the space, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow across the gleaming floors. It was a scene of controlled chaos, where every individual seemed lost in their own world of destinations, deadlines, and dreams. In the midst of the crowd, a young man sat quietly in the corner of the VIP lounge, seemingly immune to the surrounding commotion. Barron Trump, towering in height yet unassuming in demeanor, stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his sharp blue eyes scanning the bustling terminal beyond the lounge's glass partitions. Though he was a figure known around the world, today he was just another traveler, blending into the sea of humanity. He wore a simple black hoodie and jeans, his casual attire contrasting sharply with the opulence of the first-class lounge. His gaze eventually settled on an elderly man seated by himself near the check-in counters. The man's presence was striking, not for any overt attempt to draw attention, but for the quiet dignity he carried. He wore a weathered military jacket adorned with medals that gleamed faintly under the artificial lights. His face, lined with age, told stories of battles fought and hardships endured. His hands, rough and calloused, trembled slightly as he fumbled with a small battered suitcase. Barron couldn't look away. Who is he? Barron wondered, a flicker of curiosity sparking in his mind. The man's worn appearance and solitary demeanor stood in stark contrast to the bustling energy around him. Barron felt an inexplicable pull toward the stranger, as though the man's mere presence carried a weight of untold stories, stories that deserved to be heard. Barron shifted in his seat, his thoughts racing. He was accustomed to observing the world with a quiet detachment, but something about the old man stirred a sense of urgency within him. His first-class ticket promised unparalleled comfort and luxury, a reclining leather seat, gourmet meals, and a private space to relax. Yet as he thought about the elderly man, the idea of enjoying such privileges felt hollow. He watched as the man struggled to lift his suitcase onto a conveyor belt, his frail arms shaking with the effort. A pang of guilt gnawed at Barron. Here he was, surrounded by every convenience money could buy, while this man, who had clearly sacrificed so much, seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Barron stood abruptly, his decision made. He approached a nearby flight attendant, a young woman with a polished uniform and a warm smile. "Excuse me," he said politely, his voice steady. "There's an elderly gentleman in the economy section wearing a military jacket. Could you please offer him my first-class seat? I believe he deserves it more than I do." The flight attendant blinked in surprise. It wasn't every day that someone voluntarily gave up such a coveted seat, let alone someone as high-profile as Barron Trump. She hesitated for a moment, her professional demeanor masking her astonishment, before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Trump. I'll let him know immediately." The elderly man was seated near the back of the plane, his figure slightly hunched as he flipped through a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages were filled with faded writing and sketches, their meaning known only to him. When the flight attendant approached and relayed Barron's offer, the man looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and disbelief. "That's very kind of him," the man said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. He glanced toward the first-class cabin where Barron stood waiting. "But I'm fine here. I've spent most of my life in far less comfortable places. This seat is more than enough for me." The flight attendant returned to Barron with the man's response, but Barron was undeterred. Without hesitation, he made his way to the economy section, weaving through the narrow aisle until he stood before the old man. "Hello, sir," Barron said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "I'm Barron Trump. I'd like to personally offer you my seat in first class. It's the least I can do to thank you for your service." The old man looked up at Barron, his tired eyes softening with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You're very kind," he said, shaking Barron's hand firmly. "But may I ask why you're doing this?" Barron hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "Because people like you have sacrificed so much for all of us," he said earnestly. "Offering you this seat is just a small way to show my appreciation. Moved by Barron's sincerity, the old man finally accepted the offer. As they walked toward the first-class cabin together, passengers turned to watch, murmurs of curiosity and admiration rippling through the plane. Once seated, the man began to open up, sharing snippets of his life with Barron and the passengers nearby. "These medals," he said, gesturing to the decorations on his jacket, "represent decades of service. But they're not just mine. They belong to the men I served with, some of whom never made it back home." As the conversation deepened, an unexpected connection emerged. The man shared a story from decades earlier when he was a struggling veteran trying to reintegrate into civilian life. "There was a man who gave me a chance when no one else would," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Fred Trump, your grandfather. He offered me a job when I had nowhere else to turn." Barron listened intently, his respect for the man growing with every word. "I had no idea," he said softly. "It seems my family owes you just as much as you feel you owe us." Word of Barron's gesture spread quickly throughout the plane. Passengers whispered among themselves, some discreetly snapping photos while others simply watched in admiration. The story resonated deeply, not just because of the kindness Barron displayed, but because of the serendipitous connection between the Trump family and the veteran. Barron, now seated in the economy section, seemed completely unbothered by the downgrade in comfort. He struck up conversations with the passengers around him, his genuine curiosity and humility leaving a lasting impression. When the plane finally touched down, there was a subtle shift in the air. The hum of the engines quieted, and passengers began gathering their belongings, some still stealing glances at Barron and the elderly veteran. Outside the terminal, an unexpected sight awaited. A small group of people had gathered, alerted by viral social media posts that had spread like wildfire during the flight. The story of Barron Trump giving up his first-class seat to a war veteran had resonated deeply, and now strangers stood with phones in hand, eager to catch a glimpse of the young man whose act of kindness had touched so many. As Barron moved toward the exit, he tried to maintain his usual understated demeanor, quietly thanking the flight attendants and giving a polite nod to the passengers who acknowledged him. But before he could leave the terminal, the veteran stopped him. The old man's hand, still strong despite its age, gripped Barron's with surprising firmness. His eyes, now glistening with tears, locked onto Barron's with an intensity that spoke volumes. "Barron," the veteran began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "what you did today wasn't just about offering me a seat. It was a gesture of respect, not just for me, but for every man and woman who has ever served. You reminded me, and everyone else on that plane, that gratitude still exists in this world, even in the smallest acts." He paused, taking a deep breath as if to steady himself. "What makes this even more meaningful is the connection I never expected. Your grandfather, Fred Trump, gave me a chance when I had nothing left. And now, you've given me a moment I'll never forget. It's as if your family has been a part of my story all along." Barron, visibly moved, responded with a humility that belied his young age. "Sir, your story is a reminder of what true sacrifice and resilience look like. If my family played even a small part in your journey, then I'm grateful. But today wasn't about repaying a debt. It was about honoring someone who has given so much to others. You deserve more than just a seat on a plane. You deserve the world's gratitude." The exchange seemed to freeze time for a moment, the hustle and bustle of the airport fading into the background. The veteran reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered pin, a symbol of his military service. "I want you to have this," he said, pressing it into Barron's hand. "It's a token of my gratitude, a reminder that you've made a difference today. This pin has seen battlefields and hardships, but now it will represent something else. Hope." Barron hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the gesture. "I don't feel worthy of this," he admitted, "but I promise to carry it with the respect it deserves." "Thank you." As they parted ways, the scene left a profound impression on everyone who witnessed it. Passengers who had seen the exchange up close were still whispering among themselves, and the small crowd outside the terminal erupted into cheers when Barron emerged. But instead of basking in the attention, Barron simply waved politely and quickly disappeared into the waiting car. For him, the day wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the story gained momentum online. Social media platforms were flooded with posts recounting Barron's gesture, accompanied by photos and videos taken by passengers on the flight. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a powerful reminder of the impact small acts of kindness can have. But for Barron, the true impact wasn't in the headlines or the viral posts. It was in the quiet moments of connection he had shared with the veteran. The pin the veteran had given him became a treasured possession. Barron carried it with him everywhere, a tangible reminder of the man's sacrifices and the importance of gratitude. It wasn't long before Barron decided to take his gesture a step further. Inspired by the encounter, he began researching organizations that supported veterans, quietly donating and even volunteering his time to causes that aligned with the values he had glimpsed in the old man. Meanwhile, the veteran's life was also touched by the experience. He shared the story with his family, who were moved to tears by Barron's humility and generosity. "It's not every day you meet someone who truly sees you," he told his granddaughter, who later shared his words in a heartfelt social media post that gained widespread attention. "Barron Trump didn't just see me, he reminded me that my story still matters." Their story became a symbol of intergenerational respect and the power of small, selfless acts to create ripples of positivity. It wasn't just a tale of a young man giving up a seat on a plane. It was a reminder of the enduring impact of compassion, the importance of honoring those who came before us, in the unexpected ways in which lives can intersect. For Barron, the encounter was a turning point, a moment that reaffirmed the values he wanted to live by. And for the veteran, it was a reminder that even in a world as fast-paced and chaotic as an airport terminal, there was still room for kindness, connection, and gratitude.